I put on 9 kilos of lean muscle mass in 12 weeks. You feel like a god among men.
It's a paradox, isn't it? Going to the gym is healthy. If you were spending 24 hours in the gym, not so healthy.
It can make men infertile. There's the cardiovascular risks. Yes, they grow your muscles, but they also grow your heart muscle.
There's no more testosterone-fueled environment than a prison environment. Yeah. I can say that from personal experience. Sometimes the only thing that you can do to get out of your cell is go to the gym.
The only people that complimented you are the Jew heads. That means nothing to me. Absolutely nothing.
Why does this man stand out? On Love Island, you're more likely to stand out for having a regular body than that of a professional bodybuilder. From your TV to your gym, from your Instagram feed to online shopping, muscly hunks are everywhere. And about 1 million of them in the UK are currently taking steroids. In recent decades, the popularity of muscle-enhancing drugs has exploded. In 1990, 95% of visitors to a needle exchange would be heroin users. Today, 60% of them want clean needles for anabolic steroids. The idea of taking steroids has always appealed to me. I knew they existed, I knew what they did, and I always thought it would be fun to be absolutely massive. I don't know why I always wanted to be so muscular and ripped, but in whatever way, my own body always felt inadequate. However, the thought of putting a needle in my ass every day put me off. Even still, it seems like we're in a national steroids epidemic, and I want to understand what it's doing to the thousands of British men that are insecure enough to inject such a powerful drug. And what's making men like me become so insecure about their bodies in the first place? To find out about what taking steroids is really like, I decided to travel to Port Talbot in Wales to speak to Thomas Powell, an ex-Love Islander who's been very open about his steroid use in the past.
My goal on Love Island was to become a sponsored athlete. I wanted to be really in the fitness industry. So after Love Island, I met my idols, the Harrison twins. They were fitness influencers. I thought they were the dog's bollocks. I got sponsored by the same supplement company as them, got to train with them, and I said, boys, talk to me now. Is everyone on juice in the industry? Let me know. And they said, yeah, unfortunately, Tom, absolutely they are.
Yeah.
So sort of that was the deciding factor.
What made you, as a person who already, I guess, from my point of view, or many men's point of view and women's point of view, is like an idealised body form, what made you think from there to go, right, I need to get even more idealised or even more kind of like bigger and stronger kind of thing?
I suppose looking back at it, body dysmorphia to the highest level. I'm 110 kilos now, roughly. Not that I care about body weight. Back then I was 90 kilos, so I was 20 kilos lighter than I was now. I know this is a silly thing to say, the camera genuinely does add 10 pounds. I think I look jacker than that, and I didn't look like that when I looked in the mirror. But again, maybe that was body dysmorphia to the highest level, to the most extreme, and I didn't even realise it. I have never thought that I've been in great shape. I'd never thought other people look at me and think, yeah, he's in great shape. Yeah. Even then, you know, like on Love Island, how many times did I have my top off? Probably 3 in the 6 weeks I was there. Yeah. Because I was never really confident enough to fully expose my body, and like you just said, you think a lot of people would have looked up and idealised my body physique. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a strange one. Now, I'll get naked anywhere. I don't care. I'm a rugby lad, so rugby lads do tend to get naked anywhere, like peer pressure challenge. I don't know if you know what that is. If someone shouts peer pressure challenge, piss yourself, you've just got to piss yourself. If someone says peer pressure challenge, eat that urinal cake, you've got to eat the urinal cake. It's rugby lads, so we get naked quite a lot. I cared less getting bollock naked than taking my top off. Yeah. How strange is that? That's how fucked up body dysmorphia is. I would rather get bollock naked, because obviously people are not worried about my physique. The first 4 times I ever injected, my mate had to do it with me looking away. Yeah. And now I can't have anyone else do it but myself. I don't trust anyone but myself.
So how does this work?
So this is bacteriostatic water. You've got to mix that with the growth hormone solution. Right. So what we do is we take out, because we've got to mix it 1 ml with that to make the correct dosage. So 1 ml. It should be vacuumed. If it's good growth hormone, it means you put it in and it goes in straight away like this. Oh, right. Which means this is vacuum sealed. It's usually to a high quality. So now you just mix it a little bit, because you don't want much bubbles. There's so many things that can go wrong. Wrong injection sites, putting air bubbles into you, twisting, putting the wrong needle in, hitting a bone, hitting a nerve. There's so much that can go wrong. You need to know how to counteract it if it does. So these are just alcohol swabs. Wipe the area. So what we're going to do is grab this fat and we're going to go in at an angle, right? All I do is 3 IUs a day. Most researched for cell regeneration is 3 IUs. Okay. And it gets ungodly expensive if you start pushing those numbers anyway.
Yeah. How much is it actually, like a month?
For round about £140 for 100 IUs. Right. And then I do 3 IUs a day. So now you can see There's just over 3 I use in there, just over 30.
Yeah.
I'll push it out so it squirts. Now you can see there's no air bubbles at all.
Okay.
And all you do is pinch where you did, at an angle, through the skin, into your fat, and back out. And it's as easy as that. I genuinely didn't feel that.
Yeah.
Because this is a very small needle, you don't tend to feel this. One more wipe down, just to be on the overly precautious side. But again, you don't need to wipe afterwards. It's the break in the skin because you'll be pushing the bacteria in.
Yeah.
You always need to wipe before. This will go in the fridge.
Right.
And then this will just go in the needle bin that they've given me from the needle exchange. The first couple were horrible. I couldn't do it. Me and the boys used to have a clinic because my mate started about 6 months after me.
Yeah.
So we used to do it together. I used to do it to him and then do it to myself.
Yeah.
And we used to call it the clinic for a while. I don't have a bad opinion on steroids. If you want to excel in sport, it's a fantastic help. Don't get me wrong, you might get caught, but most elite athletes are taking steroids.
Yeah.
Absolutely they are. And if you're a bodybuilder, I totally understand it. But to just look good in the summer, I'd seriously think twice about it.
Yeah.
And now I never run cycles anymore. I'll do TRT. Growth hormone, obviously, just because of my bicep rupture, but I'll never take like a synthetic drug, sort of an Anavar to harden you up to look better on the beach in the summer. I'll never do a cycle to, you know, shred down to look better for a holiday. I think that is damaging.
We know that they work, they make you lose weight, they make you get stacked. So everyone knows that, but like, how have you personally interacted with it? What have been the pros in your life?
So, a positive, I put on 9 kilos of lean muscle mass in 12 weeks on my first ever cycle. You feel like a god among men. You feel so much more confident. And not just because you look better, increased testosterone gives you that confidence. What testosterone does, as a basic level, it makes effort feel good. That makes you more of a man. And then when you come off, you're like, is this what it feels to be a human again? This isn't a nice feeling I'm aching. I can't go that hard in the gym because tomorrow I won't be able to walk. Whereas I'm recovering fantastically on steroids. You don't ache anywhere near as much. You can put much more effort in the gym into anything in life. You need to research the arse out of it. It will catch you up. I wouldn't recommend it to young men. I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone apart from those looking to really push their physique and push their sporting activity. I just think they're going to damage their hormone levels in the long run, like a lack of testosterone, and they're not going to realise that they're damaging their bodies until it's too late. When they're 30, they have 0 testosterone, they can't sleep, they're suicidal, they can't put on muscle mass, you know, they can't have kids, and they're wondering why. It's because they abused steroids or misused steroids when they were younger. I'm not against use, but I'm against misuse. If you are not educated about it, it is always misuse.
You were talking about the kind of mental health aspect and body dysmorphia as well from being on Love Island. I did want to touch on that because it is such a well-worn trope, I guess, about Love Island causing body dysmorphia in men in itself, because obviously like guys like you who are like well put together, they're going on Love Island, they're kind of showing off their bodies, and then men think, I have to look like that. How do you feel about, in your own way, contributing to kind of a sense of body dysmorphia in younger men maybe, or playing a part of it in whatever way?
I never really thought about it that way because before Love Island I was always natural. It was my hard work that got me in that physique, and I was never unhealthy with it. I don't think that I created body dysmorphia. I think that I created a lot of people wanting to get healthy and wanting to get happier and in better shape. I was just promoting health and fitness, but I want to be able to run for the bus. I want to be able to pick my kid up and run up the mountain if I want to do it. I want to be able to wipe my ass when I'm 95. You know, so I think mobility, strength training, conditioning is important for every single person, but a lack of body fat means nothing.
Quite a complicated journey with your own self-worth. How have you felt your self-worth, and how have you felt actually, I guess, just being a man? How have you felt your own kind of idea of being a man has changed since, I guess, Love Island to now? And how do you think steroids has kind of related to that?
Since growing up and becoming more of a man, I've realised that steroids don't make you a man. Being bigger, being jacked, being more muscular doesn't make you any more of a man. No one cares if you've got bigger muscles. Trust me, I've had bigger muscles, and the only people that complimented you are the juice heads. That means nothing to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
In my experience, when you ask most men why they're working out, they'll tell you it's to feel more confident in their own body so they can attract a partner. And what's so interesting to me about the extreme end of bodybuilding and steroid taking is that in a lot of instances, it's gym heads only looking to impress other gym heads, because the average person doesn't really find it attractive when you look freakishly massive and ripped. Body dysmorphia and eating disorders are stereotypically associated with women, but a growing number of men now have similarly damaging standards of diet and body image. but because they wrap it up in healthy sounding terms like cutting weight and putting on muscle, it can give what are unhealthy obsessions a fitness veneer. Similar to Thomas, I personally suffered from body dysmorphia when I was younger after I obsessively cut weight for white-collar boxing matches. And I wanted to find out just how and why these mental fixations developed. So I came to Dr. Daniel Masood, a clinical psychologist at the Showing Clinic in Chelsea, who specialises in treating body dysmorphia in men.
What is body dysmorphia?
Body dysmorphia is when you start to obsess about a particular area of your body. Some people might, for example, obsess about a particular part of their body, like their nose, but also it can be just how you view yourself, your body in general. And it usually involves some level of distress about what they're seeing. And I think the big factor here as well is that there's a varying degree, a spectrum of impedance to their daily function. So this will affect them at work, it'll affect them at home, it might affect them socially. When you're in the gym, that a lot of people, maybe after a session or before a session, might spend lots more time in the mirror or even recording their progress and then checking that and even seeking validation outside of that, maybe through social media. The only bits where there's a bit of differentiation, more for my part, would be when there's a concern about gender identity and also differentiating that, if you can, from an eating disorder. Maybe the core belief is, I'm too fat. And I need to be thinner.
We're talking about like male body dysmorphia. That obviously very closely relates to their gender. At the end of the day, it's like it's gender affirming, really, to be more strong and muscly as a man. How have you seen body dysmorphia, I guess, manifest itself in young men and men generally?
It used to be that people desired athleticism, functional strength. Nowadays, it's more specific body parts need to be broader, bigger, they need to be more hypertrophic, hypermuscly, chiseled abs, more definition. Where that's changed, I think, would certainly be around the Love Island era, or even as far back as 2010s, where you start to get the rise of the social media, the fitness influencer that will be saying this is what you need to look like and this is what you should try to aim for and strive for, and perhaps setting fairly unrealistic expectations, and then people going to any length to try and achieve that, even if actually the journey towards that is quite dangerous. For men, they often don't recognise what's happening. What you're starting to see is them presenting a lot later, usually 10 to 15 years later than when the actual problem would have started. Someone that came in to see me quite recently who had a relationship breakdown, and this was because their long-term partner who they were marrying was saying, look, you're spending more and more time in the gym. Our whole life revolves around what you eat, what you put in your body. You're spending loads of time in the mirror. You're constantly asking me for reassurance. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And now we have children, and they're sort of starting to pick up those behaviours as well. I'm not sure if this can carry on. I think you need to get some help. But this is sort of 10 to 15 years into a relationship.
But I bet he could probably bench press loads, so it's probably worth it.
But once you started to get into it, actually, you realise his whole life was being taken over. In the gym early in the morning, leaving work early, spending time in his lunch breaks rather than getting lunch, as far as getting unchanged at work, and starting to sort of check himself out at work and record his progress during the daytime. And this guy had like a regular office job. He's even thinking about transitioning from that job to becoming a PT, where he would spend more of his time in the gym. For the gym goer, that might be where they start to think about, do I need to start putting things in my body, use anabolic steroids or SARMs? Do I need to take these steps now to achieve what I want to, what I think will make me feel better about myself? About 1 in 50 people in the UK will have body dysmorphia. About 54% of people, according to the Mental Health Foundation, reported some symptoms that would align with body dysmorphia. Around 28% of people will experience distress. About 11% of those would feel a degree of suicidality. It's a paradox, isn't it? Going to the gym is healthy. If you were spending 24 hours in the gym, not so healthy. Years ago, before everybody's got phones and access to social media and people sort of bleating about what they're doing, now there's just infinitely numbers of ways that you can compare yourself to people. If you're considering putting these things in your body to achieve what you think is really important at the time, where does it stop? Why do you not think you're good enough? And maybe that's a time to sort of seek some help, or for others around them to intervene if they can.
While it's true that big tech has an incredibly unhealthy control over our lives,
because it collects huge amounts of personal data which it exploits to create incredibly targeted algorithms that market our deepest insecurities back to us, giving us permanent feeling of anxiety, dread, and a lack of control of our lives that can only be solved by increasingly harmful solutions like steroids or cosmetic surgeries.
it also makes loads of money, none of which seems to get taxed. And that's a good thing, by the way. But what does the government think? I wanted to speak to one of the only MPs who has ever spoken publicly about steroids and body image in Parliament, Dr. Luke Evans, a former GP and Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, to get a political view.
When I was going through quite a turbulent time in my life a couple of years ago, I was unemployed, I was in a lot of debt, and then the gym was the only way I had control over my life. And I guess what I've noticed, I guess, in a lot of young men in a similar position is that body image, or I guess the gym, is the only way they can control themselves in a society that's kind of increasingly giving them less and less control. And how would you really, in a perfect world, deal with that in a socio-political way?
You are so right. And one of the biggest problems we have is this talk of toxic masculinity, yet we don't have a decent role model of what, you know, positive masculinity is, that it is okay to be, you know, strong and, you know, look after yourself, look after your family. We don't have those positive role models, and the way men can take control is to actually go to the gym, release their aggression there, compete in a way that's constructive. That's what sport like boxing and rugby always used to do. This is the next step of it. If you tell people they can't do that, then there's a real problem. Where do they get their outlet? And we know one of the concerns I have is the amount of people who are potentially using steroids and ending up in prison. There's quite a lot of studies suggesting that, for example, in the last 2 years, it was about 1% of drug raids were getting anabolic steroids. Now it's 10% in Scotland, so we know it's on the rise.
If it was up to you and you were a health minister, like right now, what would be the practical steps that you would take?
So the first thing we need is data. Actually, one of the hardest things in this area is we just don't have the data. Once we know the data, we can start looking at what the solutions are. As for the wider policy of how do we solve more the men's health stuff, well, actually, I'm pleased to see the new government has launched a men's health strategy, a call for evidence to say what does that look like. For a personal position, I'd love to see a boys and men's minister to actually take some of these issues forward, because the problem is, if I speak to sport, they say, well, look, it's elite sport. If you speak to people who use it recreationally, it's a health issue, but health there is a sport issue. And then there's the education in as well, and it's cross-government. It's really difficult. So this is when you get that whole society approach. So if we had a minister for men and boys, actually they'd be able to look at this in the round and say, how do we tackle anything from suicide to depression to body image and most of all steroid abuse?
Where do you stand on legalization of it? Do you think that increased, like, harsher sentences, harsher classification as a drug would be beneficial, or do you think it would be actually more beneficial just to have increased education, increased awareness of it?
Do you know, at this point, I'm going to be completely honest as a politician, I don't know. I'd be open to both solutions. My gut feeling is that I would probably want to see it strengthened, but actually if there's a better way and safer way of doing this, I'd be open to the solution. So some of the work we've looked at in the continent, for example, is some of the Scandinavian countries' licensed gyms. So if this was a new nightclub, for example, you'd have to have a license. If a nightclub was peddling a lot of ecstasy, you'd lose your license. Well, is that a role we could do for gyms? But then that puts a lot of pressure on that side. So I'm open to solutions. As I said, we're 20 years away from getting the right answer, because we just don't even know the data, who's using, where they're using, why they're using, and that's the picture we need to build to then come up with the solution. So that's my big call to the government, is say, look, this is a massive problem. If we believe the data, and most people say it's more than 1 million people, if that's the case and it's growing, surely we need to put a spotlight on it, because therefore it's the biggest drug problem in the UK. What are we going to do about it?
Okay, last question. How much can you bench press and how much can you deadlift?
Now or best ever? So,
what's your PB?
Yeah, best ever is 120 on a bench press.
Nice.
I can't do much of it. I had my neck operated on. I slipped a disc in my neck playing
Is that
rugby.
from doing? Oh, playing rugby. Okay.
Yeah, I used to play in the front row.
Fair.
So from that on, and God, I haven't deadlifted for a long time because of my back for that reason. So
Fair. 120 is still pretty good.
Yeah, no, at my peak days, I was a little bit bigger at that point in times.
One of the most confusing things about my time with Dr. Luke Evans was that although he was a Tory, he actually seemed quite sound, and he can even bench quite a lot. A real issue with steroids is how it's essentially bypassed a lot of the moral panics that more traditional recreational drugs have had throughout recent history, like weed, ecstasy, or laughing gas, simply because it's so hard for governments to categorise who actually deals with it. Is it an elite sporting issue? Is it a social issue? Is it a policing issue? A mental health issue? Not even the government really seems sure. Even someone as frontline as Dr. Evans is and has been with the drug. Whoever is in charge of it, it's pretty clear they're now dealing with a steroids epidemic in British men, spurred on by a massive increase in body dysmorphia. What's causing this body dysmorphia seems to be an obsessive comparison to unrealistic body standards via increasingly invasive forms of media, like fitness and gym influencers, TV shows like Love Island, and digitally altered superhero six-packs in Marvel films. And if you're a woman watching this, I know you're probably thinking, well, we've had a lifetime dealing with these kind of issues, and men have only had to really deal with it for about 5 minutes, so shut the fuck up. The thing is, men's mental health is actually more special and different. But why should we be worried about the steroids epidemic anyway? Don't they just make you bigger and stronger? Well, not exactly, because steroids can affect the body in a huge variety of ways. To find out exactly what steroids do, I went to see Dr. Bonnie Grant, a clinical researcher at Imperial College London, who specialises in the study of how hormones and steroids affect the human body.
Anabolic steroids are basically mimics of the hormone testosterone. Testosterone is made in the testes, so they're the two organs that sit in the scrotum in men. It's controlled by signals from the brain in a really neat, balanced way. So if your testes make too much testosterone, the signals from the brain tell you to make less, and vice versa. The problem with anabolic steroids is because they mimic testosterone, the body just thinks you have too much. So the whole system shuts down. So the brain stops sending those signals and says, stop making testosterone, we've got too much. When men stop, it takes a while for this to start back up again. And studies have suggested in some men this may be 3 months, in some men this may be 12 months. And there seems to be some men that it never goes back to normal afterwards as well. And it's the natural testosterone in the testes that is needed to make sperm.
Tell me what happens to the human body when you take steroids. What are the kind of setbacks, short-term and long-term?
One of the biggest problems with anabolic steroids is it can make men infertile. There's the cardiovascular risks. Yes, they grow your muscles, but they also grow your heart muscle. So that can make your heart become enlarged, it can make your heart become stiff, and that means it doesn't pump as well. If left for a long period of time to do that, you will ultimately develop heart failure. That then could also lead to high blood pressure. That puts you at risk of stroke and heart attack as well. It makes your hemoglobin level go up. What that means is your blood becomes thick and sticky, much more likely to clot. So if you get clots in the heart attack. If you get clots in the brain, strokes. Also, it can change your cholesterol levels, so it can really increase your bad cholesterol and really lower your good cholesterol, which again can contribute to things like heart attacks and strokes. It's not very strong evidence, but there is some evidence out there. And these are naturally high levels of testosterone in your blood and your brain can change some of the chemicals in your brain and make you more likely to develop things like psychosis and other mental health disorders. Another hormone that is very, very closely linked to this is estrogen. Estrogen is the predominant hormone in women. So if you're taking anabolic steroids and you've got a very, very high testosterone level, your body will convert a lot of that to estrogen. And this is why men may develop what's called gynecomastia or man boobs, so breast tissue. Those high estrogen levels can then impact your sexual function as well. And so even if you're taking these substances, men may say, I don't feel my libido is normal, I don't feel like I'm having the same sexual desires as I did before. It's because your testosterone and estrogens are just completely out of whack.
With steroids being so physically damaging to the body and mind, it feels like we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, both for public health and for the general mental well-being for a growing number of men across the country. And what's becoming clear is that there's no real standardised way to help these men. There's a lot of individual ways to deal with the problem, like a therapist or a GP, but compared to drugs like heroin or alcohol, there's no holistic program for steroid users that helps them with the unique problems they face. That's why it's so important that people like Joe Kean exist. He's a senior public health specialist with over 20 years' experience in helping local drugs and alcohol services, with a specific focus on needle exchange groups. I came to visit him in Bradford to see how he's helping men take steroids safely.
If I'm a guy who takes steroids, I live up in Bradford or live near a service that you provided, what would be the kind of advice that you would give me, or how would you deal with someone like me?
So the first port of call should always be your alcohol and drug service, because some of those have really good provision within them. You know, I know that Way Through have got some great clinics at the moment, CGL have got some leads, but there are places around the country where those services don't have the skill base and the knowledge base to really understand and support those particular individuals, and they don't offer bloods, they don't offer bioimpedance, they don't offer full comprehensive. They'll just offer clean needles and syringes, which is really, really important, but they don't have the skill base to be able to deliver some of those psychosocial interventions, to offer particular advice, to understand at what point they're in their cycle, why they might feel in a certain way.
Right.
So that's what we want to do and what we try to do. And we try to have that. They're unbelievably well attended. We end up with queues and queues and queues of people. The last one that we did, we advertised once and we had 20, 30 people more than we needed every clinic. You know, we tested 120 people in over 5 clinics. All of those people, we were able to give them a report, showed all of their bloods. We had about 7 of them that had repeat bloods because some of them had markers. We had a guy come in that ended up that had a brain tumour. That we found. In fact, our Imperial colleagues gave some advice about how important it was to see a GP. I think there's only 5 clinics that I know of in the UK, in England and Scotland. The last one that we ran, we had guys travelling for 150 miles to come to our clinic. Because we were doing it for free.
Obviously, you've been doing this for 20 years. You've obviously got a lot of experience with the types of men. Right now, we're in Bradford. I was speaking to Thomas Powell in Wales. These are kind of areas that have been more economically deprived. Is that a factor that you think is driving these exact type of things, like heavy reliance on cocaine, alcohol, steroids, or is there other kind of factors you think are more prominent in why men are kind of getting into these lifestyles?
All across the country, if you look at the indices of deprivation and you overlay that with alcohol and drug use, you'll see a pretty close match.
And is the same with steroids?
It's pretty similar with steroids. I mean, the thing with steroids is that you get every type of person. You'll get a judge come in, you'll get firemen come in, you'll get guys come in that just from council estates. The thing with over the last 20 years, when it first appeared, like you were saying, we thought of it as a functional drug. People just want it to be healthier and get bigger. Then we started to see all the psychoactive elements of it and understand those. Then we started to see the dependency elements of it. Now we recognise that it's another drug. And all we can do is help them do it as safely as possible. Ideally, not to do it, of course.
Are you like an active steroid user?
No, so not an active steroid user. I've used them in the past. I use them in a prison environment. Published research paper on how guys go into prison, they get off heroin, they want to look healthy and well.
Because they want to beef up after becoming emaciated.
And they say themselves they don't want to look like a typical heroin user.
So they want to get more.
They want their family to look like they're healthy. They want to, there's no more testosterone-fueled environment than a prison environment. I can say that from personal experience. Sometimes the only thing that you can do to get out of your cell is go to the gym. The number of people that train in gyms is exactly the opposite to the number of people that train outside in the general community. So I think it's about 14% of the general population actually go to gyms and train. And in the prison, it's the opposite way around. When I was living in one of Her Majesty's establishments, I first used them. I was playing rugby, and while I was inside, that was amazing for me. Kept me busy, kept me healthy, kept my mind, kept my mental health good. I got a back injury, and I thought, I can't be sat in a cell for 6 months. I would struggle to maintain my sanity, my well-being. And the gym officer said to me, tell you what, don't worry about it. Brought me in 3 jabs, and then within 3 weeks I was back playing rugby. And I think the thing with GPs as well is that they get like 9 minutes, an appointment. What can they do in that period of time? They can't sit down and really go into detail about your mental health well-being, really talk to you about your nutrition. They won't necessarily know about diet and training and those kinds of things. The ideal scenario is that we get to work a lot more with some of our GP colleagues. I get referrals from GP colleagues just to ask for generic support, and it's great that there isn't a fear thing for them to come to us. Let us have a chat with the guy, we'll show them a safe injecting technique. We might be able to say to you, this is why he might be feeling like that. I'd be really keen for us to have like a generic bespoke training packages for GPs everywhere. Just a really short, sharp bit to say to them, these are the basics about things. This is where to go. This is where we think is really good advice.
So where do we go from here? With an estimated 1 million steroid users in the UK and rising body dysmorphia, predatory algorithms and the ability to buy steroids now quicker and easier than ever, it feels like that number's only going to get higher. What's clear from my time speaking to users and experts is that both in the short term and long term, the effects of steroids can be seriously damaging. But many symptoms are so easy to hide that a lot of men will just ignore them or not deal with them until it's too late, especially when the positives are so visible. Personally, I'd never take steroids, mainly because I'm too much of a wuss with needles. But I can totally understand the reasons why so many men do. Simply put, they work. They reward hard work in the gym, and they make you look better, faster. But when you speak to guys like Thomas and Joe, they're practically scientists with how much knowledge they have about testosterone, hormones, and safe injection techniques. And if every steroid user was like them, there wouldn't really be much of a problem. What I worry about is how many men are seeing the short-term positives without doing their proper research into the long-term negatives. When young lads are wanting results faster for reasons as trivial as a holiday, they're getting pushed towards what can be quite dangerous drugs without doing the substantial research required to take them safely. My opinion on steroids is the same as it is for nearly every recreational drug. If people want to take them, go ahead, but make sure you know exactly what you're doing before you even think about attempting it. In the same way you wouldn't jump straight into taking DMT as your first hallucinogen, maybe don't start watching Trend before you know your steroids inside out.